Hello, I'm Dan Tomberlin, the Executive Director of PTS Thrive at Pentecostal Theological Seminary. It's a joy to have my friend and colleague and brother Bill Lee here with us today, and we're going to have a discussion about conflict and racial conflict within the church. I want to encourage you to take a moment and share this discussion on your Facebook page. I also want to take just a second, let you know what PTS Thrive is all about. PTS Thrive has the mission of encouraging early career pastors or mid-career pastors in significant conflict. And I think we can all agree that right now that we're trying to navigate some significant conflict. So Bill and I just wanted to come together and engage in a conversation. Dialogue partners. Bill is well known in the Church of God as an evangelist, revivalist, and we've known each other 10, 15 years.
Yes, I know.
And had some wonderful fellowship and good conversation. So I'm grateful that Bill has agreed to join us. We have a few questions. We've outlined a few things we want to discuss, but this is not going to be a heavily structured conversation. But we do want you to possibly just, if you've got some questions, send them our way and we'll try to address them. Bill, the first thing that I thought we would do is talk about what the Church of God has said about social justice, our social obligation.
Sure.
A lot of people get uptight about the concept of a social gospel or social justice,
Right.
but the Church of God has had a social justice statement for decades now.
Okay.
And this was codified in our General Assembly minutes, in our statements of faith, what we call our practical commitments. Just want to read it real quick. I'm not going to read all of it. There's a paragraph that's specifically dealing with correcting social injustices.
Sure.
So just give me a moment to read it. This is, again, the official statement teaching of the Church of God. Love for others and the recognition of equal worth of all men in the sight of God should compel us to take steps to improve the situation of those who are underprivileged, neglected, hungry, homeless, and victimized by prejudice, persecution, and oppression. In all our dealings, we must be sensitive to human needs and guard against racial and economic discrimination. Every person should have freedom to worship and participate in the life of the church regardless of race, color, sex, social class, or nationality. So what I'd like to ask, Bill, is how do you think we measure to that standard in the past? How does this statement on social justice address the current conflict? And maybe a way forward. So let's talk about your own experience as an ordained bishop in the Church of God, national evangelist in the Church of God. What's been your experience? How have we lived up to this?
Okay, let me first say that I think that in some areas we've done some outstanding work. I think that, when you talk about ministry, I think it talked about underprivileged persons, ministry to the poor, Mission America, the things that we have done, our response to emergencies and tragedies and things like that, we're second to none. Okay, so we've done great. However, there is an area that for some reason or another, and we'll be talking about that we deem to be untouchable, even unmentionable. And that would be this area of racism. It's a topic that unfortunately has become, at one time was taboo in the church. I'm grateful for our response during this time because people are finally talking about it. But for a long period of time, you were deemed radical, labeled a liberal, a leftist, and the whole list goes on, even for just bringing up or preaching about this particular issue. Now, for me, I'm coming from Springfield, Mass, in the Northeast, transitioning here to Lee College as an 18-year-old was when I kind of realized Church of God had some issues regarding this. I came into the Church of God from the Presbyterian Church as a 14, 15-year-old, and actually met Robert O'Bannon in my high school years, he came to do a retreat. And he, along with a couple of members, talked to me about Lee. And I also had a good friend that had gone out a year ahead of me. So, I thought this place would be, next, to heaven, Christian school and all of that. But after arriving, I started noticing certain things, and probably the event that spoke the loudest to me about our need to address racism. I was staying in Medlin Hall. At that time, I think it may have still been Walker Hall. And I posted a picture of one of my heroes, which would be Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., on the outside of my dorm door. Went to class, out the whole day, and when I came back from class, I noticed that my picture had been defaced. And when I looked closer, someone had written the words communist in one corner and the word coon in another corner.
At a Church of God school.
Church of God school,
Yeah.
So I was angry, surprised, disappointed. So, I posted a sign on top of that, and that simply said, if you were half the man that he was, that you would come and tell me how you feel about him to my face. And after having that up probably for a few hours, I get a knock on the door, and the dorm director is there, and he asked me to take my sign down as well as my picture, and even kind of approach the whole situation like somehow I had done something wrong, by celebrating an icon like Dr. King. And I think from that moment, it opened my eyes to a lot of things, but it also made me commit to dealing with racial issues in the church, on campus even, and from the various positions and platforms I've been given, I've approached it over the years in different ways. Okay.
I told you many times, and anybody who's heard me speak, at 38 years of pastoring,
Yeah.
there are two subjects I could preach on and have people waiting at the door to chew me out.
Oh, yeah.
The first one would be adultery or fornication, because people in the church were committing adultery or fornication. They didn't want to hear me preach about it.
That's right.
And the other one was racism.
Yeah.
If I preached about racism in my churches, I would always get a lot of grief about it. So, which brings me to looking at Facebook feeds over the last 2 or 3 weeks, these group of preachers or these group of people who were trying to suggest that the issue is not racism, that the issue is a media narrative. What do you think about that when you see stuff like that?
I read some things sometime, and I just really wonder what planet some folk are living on. Even when addressing it is so interesting. You talk about how you can preach about anything else, and folk will shout with you any other sin. But when it comes to racism, we have baits, so we're going to call folk race baiters when they bring it up. We have cards, race cards, anything we can do to avoid dealing with the subject. You talked about people saying this is all media hype and all that kind of thing. No, this is something that people of color live on a daily basis. Unfortunately, it is in the back of our minds with everything that we do. Driving the car. You go to a store just to shop. You know that as soon as you walk through the door, whatever security they have, their ears are going to get up, and they're going to be watching you. Interactions with policemen, of course, in our educational pursuits, job pursuits, is really something that we really have been forced to live with on a daily basis. So for people in the pulpit to be that out of touch, it baffles me.
Now, to be fair, this is a really tough discussion to have.
Sure.
because you and I have talked about these things. We don't always agree on every specific.
Sure.
But we're brothers. We're big enough that we can disagree and still
That's right.
eat a
Yeah.
piece of chicken together.
Exactly.
But it really is a tough discussion to have, because it really does get to the heart and core of who we are and how we see the world.
That's right.
And the truth is, the matter is, you see the world differently than I do. I see the world differently than you do.
Yes.
And one of the things I've learned in the last 2 or 3 weeks is how difficult the conversation is, because we can use the same words, the same terminology, speak English to each other, but we mean something totally different.
That's right. Yeah.
And so we've got to have conversations. This is a beginning,
Yes.
but we've got to have conversations that go to greater length and
Yes.
greater depth,
Right.
and allow the voice to be heard.
That's right.
I heard Senator Tim Scott. He's a Republican from South Carolina, African American.
Okay.
2 or 3 weeks ago on the news, talking about what it was like to be stopped for being black out of place. And he told the story that after he was elected to the U.S. Senate, that he actually got stopped by the Capitol Police because he was black out of place. A black man didn't belong in the Senate. He was the first black man to be elected to the Senate, in a long, long time.
Right.
So they were not accustomed to seeing him there. Talk to us about what it means for you to be black out of place.
Okay. I was pastoring in Providence, Rhode Island. I went to Rhode Island as a pretty young man. I was 26 and single, so I was still pretty active in sports and everything. And what happened, I was got done playing pickup basketball, and me and a gentleman got in the car. I had a black Grand Am at that time. I was pretty active with hospital visitation and things, so I had my clergy sticker on the back of the car, big, pretty good size, the old one, the silver and black one that we used to.
Right.
Okay, so we're coming out of the gym, heading down the road through this neighborhood, and I spotted the police officer, who really started following as soon as we got out the gym. So we got onto a main road, and of course the lights came on. He comes up, and state trooper for Rhode Island, rainy night, and he asked me this license and registration, of course. Comes back a few minutes later, step out of the car. I said, well, step out of the car for what? So we need to search your car. So search your car, search for, and he has his hand on his gun. Hadn't pulled it at that time. So he said, well, we have some robberies and reported in the neighborhood, and I found out later that wasn't the case, but he got us out the car, and we're standing in the rain, hands in the air for about 10 minutes or so. I'm asking him questions. Why you stopped us? Do you see the clergy sticker on my car? I'm a pastor, and named the church. His words to me were, I'm a state police officer. I can do whatever the F I want. Okay. So I know that humiliating feeling, okay, to be dressed down and talked down to and mistreated simply because, again, in the wrong neighborhood.
Has that ever happened to you in the church?
You'd be surprised. I've had commentary made. I've had pastors tell me that they would love to have me come and preach, but couldn't because of the racial issue. I've had some that invited me and never showed my picture until I got there. So when the people looked up and saw that the revivalist was black, they were surprised. And honestly, I got a good response. Even after that, discovery. I've had some things said and done at Church of God altars where funny story at one of the camp meetings. I won't name which one, but I went praying for people, and I get to this one guy, and he grabs my hand and stops me. And the next night, we had a real move of God, and I was going through, and I saw him, and I got ready to pass him by, and felt somebody grab my hand, and he grabs my hand and put it on his head. So I guess he had got converted overnight. So, but yeah, so I've had those kind of things.
One of the things that I hear a lot, and I'm sure you do too, is that we spend so much talking about past issues, slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, and a lot in my tribe suggests that because this is in the past that I've never owned slaves. I hear this all the time. I've never owned a slave. Well, neither have I. My fourth great-grandfather owned 52 slaves.
Wow.
They're all named in his will, as he is giving them as property to each of his 12 children.
Wow.
So I've never owned slaves. I know that there are some in the political narrative that want to make me complicit because I'm a white guy who is a descendant of slaveholders. And you and I have talked about this. So should we approach this whole conversation from the perspective of white complicity generation after generation?
Okay.
And one of the things that I come to is Ezekiel 18. When the people of Israel have been exiled to Babylon, and the people are complaining, God has judged us for our father's sin. And Ezekiel said, no, the soul that sins shall die.
Right.
If the father was evil, but the son is righteous, the righteous shall live.
That's right.
But if the father is evil and the son embraces the father's evil, and the short of the story is, Ezekiel was saying, no, God's not judging you for the sins of your fathers. God's judging you for the sins of your fathers that you embraced,
Right.
that you passed down from generation to generation. And so my perspective of this has been, no, an American who lives in 2020 in the United States is not complicit in slavery that happened from 1619 to 1865.
Right.
But if I pass down that generational curse of racism, if I embrace that generational curse of racism, then I am indeed complicit in it.
That's right. Yeah. I think I did a video with you not too long ago, and the question was what can white people do
Right.
to help in this. There's a book by an author, Zandi, and while I don't agree with all that he's written, he does release an interesting concept that I think applies to what you're saying. He says this, he said, it's not just enough for us to say I'm not a racist, but that we move from saying I'm not a racist and not just being a person who is not a racist, but that we move to be what he calls an anti-racist.
There's no place for neutrality.
Exactly.
No place for neutrality.
Exactly. So what that involves, you talk about the systems that have been established, that are even in effect now, that those errors help to establish and perpetuate. So here we are, now in a present system where even generations and centuries later, black people are still affected by those things that took place all of these years. So as a Christian person, wherever we see racism taking place, wherever we see those power differentials that are present, that are holding people down and oppressing people, it's our responsibility to address those systems.
Exactly.
So therefore, the sins of our fathers are not visiting upon us because we refuse to accept the philosophies, the mindsets, the systems, etc., that have been established out of those years. So.
One of the problems I think that we have is we don't think about these terms biblically or theologically.
Right.
You know, again, people will say, well, I'm not responsible for what happened 200 years ago. One of the cardinal doctrines of the Christian faith is original sin.
Yeah.
that we're all sinners because of something that happened millennia ago in the Garden of Eden.
Right.
We're born into this world as sinners, alienated from God because of what Adam and Eve did in the garden.
Uh-huh.
History molds us. History shapes us.
That's right.
And it is embedded, encoded in our DNA,
Yes.
generation through generation through generation.
Mm-hmm.
And we are hopeless,
Right.
and we are helpless,
Yes.
and we are dead in sin. And therefore, the only thing that makes the difference is the convicting power of the Holy Spirit and regeneration
Yeah.
and new birth.
Right.
So for us to imagine somehow, for us to imagine that you cannot be profoundly shaped by your ancestry, or that I am not profoundly shaped by my ancestry,
Right.
is a denial
Yes.
of the Christian doctrine of how we are all born into this world,
Right.
broken, corrupted human beings.
Yes.
So, I think one of the things that troubles me when I talk to people about this, is about racism, is we don't put it in that context of original sin. That we're all broken,
Right.
and that we need to be fixed. I remember, I don't need to say this because I don't want to I don't want to get anybody who might be watching, that somebody might know it. Let's just move to the next thing here real quick. Let's talk about current events.
Okay.
When the video of Ahmaud Arbery started surfacing, young black man murdered in the streets of Brunswick, Georgia. I saw it. Plain as simple to me.
Right.
He's unarmed. I don't care what he might have done or what he might have been doing.
Right.
You don't execute people in the streets of the United States of America.
Right.
Now, I'm from South Georgia. Okay?
Yes.
The moment I saw it, I knew what it was. Again, I'm from South Georgia. I know how people talk when they're in the closets together.
Right.
So I saw that got out there. Then the murder of George Floyd in the streets of Minneapolis. America was shocked.
Yes.
White America, black America. There was a unity among white and black Americans. We are all recognizing that what we saw happen on the streets of our country was not just unjust, but horribly unjust.
Right.
So everybody is agreeing something needs to be done. And then we have not the protest, because protests are as American as apple pie. It's enshrined in the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
We get to do that.
Right.
We fought a war to get to do that. So that's not the issue. But the riots.
Yeah.
And the riots shocked, especially a lot of white Americans. Now, in my conversations with black pastors, they're not near as shocked. But white Americans were almost shocked to the point where they didn't want to talk about it anymore. So how would you talk? What would be your counsel
Okay.
to people who are watching us having this conversation? What's your response to that?
Well, first, let me just address a couple of things. The protests, as you say, this nation was birthed in protest.
It was called a tea party.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that is the right of every American. Just like our police officers, I would say 95% of those people out there marching are good people, law-abiding, doing something that they are committed to, okay? But you have a percentage, first, who want to take advantage of opportunity, hence the looting. And then, of course, among them, it's been reported that there are some white supremacist groups that are showing up to fan the flames, and what they really want is a race war. So they're in there. And just like the bad police officers that have done some of the things we've seen, there's a group within the protesters that get out of hand, unfortunately, and take advantage of the situation. While I endorse protesting, and even while I can partly understand the frustration, I mean, we're here talking about George Floyd, okay? And what that was the spark of a smoldering fire that was underneath the surface. I mean, I just looked the other night at just the videos I've been sent for a period of time. I get them, of course, all the time on Facebook, and I just kind of started listing some names. You know, Oscar Grant, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Sam DuBose, Jason Harrison, Laquan McDonald, Freddie Gray, Jason Harrison, Eric Courtney, Philando Castillo, and Sandra Bland.
And that's all been in just the last few years.
That's right. And not one of these cases, not one, was the officer held accountable. Okay? I left off the George Zimmerman situation. Okay?
Trayvon Martin.
Okay? So all of these things had taken place for so long that this was just the spark. Okay, and again, no way do I condone the looting and the violence, but the truth is we are sitting on top of a powder keg that needs to be addressed in every way that we can.
I don't know if did I ever tell you about the time I got arrested?
No, you didn't.
Sharon and I had left by day of Georgia, driving to Bainbridge, Georgia. We were to meet our youngest son to go to Tallahassee to have a Father's Day. It was Sunday Father's Day. We were going to have a Father's Day meal. And just outside of Bainbridge, Georgia, in Decatur County, I got pulled over by the State Patrol. I was going 70 miles an hour in a 55. I didn't think anything about it. You know, I thought he'll give me a ticket and we'll go about our way. Well, he came back and said, "Mr. Tomberlin, I have to take you into custody." And I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "I've got to take you into custody. There's an outstanding warrant." An outstanding warrant on me? 2 years before, on the way to a Church of God, South Georgia Church of God State Council meeting with a pastor friend named Stephen Toole, I was pulled over in Nichols, Georgia, going 45 and a 35, and they wrote me up. I sent the check in, paid the fine. Well, something happened and it didn't get recorded, so when the court date came up, they put out a bench warrant against me, and it's out there for 2 years. I didn't know a thing about it. So they take me to jail. I'm not going to go into all that. I got it. When I got there, that was, by the way, I had pastored in that community for 7 years, so when I walked in the door, the deputy that was booking me was a former member of my church. So, and everybody knew me, so, I had a little privilege, so I got out and got it taken care of. But this is the thing, I was talking to my friend who's an attorney, and I was not happy with the situation. I just asked him, do I have any recourse? And this is what he told me. He said that American law is established on the Old English common law, that the king does no wrong.
Wow, okay.
The king does no wrong. And we have adopted from that European common law in America that those in power and authority do no wrong. We just accept that they're going to act in our best interest. Right. And if something does happen, like a George Floyd, the tendency has been to give the benefit of the doubt to the police officer because the king does no wrong.
Wow.
So, and my little deal was no big deal. I mean, I was out and we went and ate Chinese food afterwards, so that's not the issue. The issue, however, is that we do need to have some sense of justice in America where those in power and authority are accountable for their actions. That if you burst, even if it's an accident, you burst into the home of a young woman and shoot her to death, there's got to be accountability.
Right.
The king does no wrong doesn't work.
Right.
That's not justice.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that's our frustration, when it comes to these issues of police brutality. The young man in South Carolina shot up a church with black people in it. Somehow he gets arrested without harm. I understand I was told that they even stopped on the way, taking him to jail, and allowed him, and bought a burger for him at Burger King, you know. You see that. You see fugitives wanted by the FBI, Caucasians, arrested without harm. A black man gets pulled over and reaches for his wallet.
And get shot.
He gets shot and killed. This guy, George Floyd, passed a fake $20 bill, tantamount to writing a bad check, and ends up getting murdered,
Choked to death.
choked to death on the street. You know, where's the fairness and the balance is our question, and why is policing being done so differently in our community?
Now, you were a former correction officer.
Yes, it was.
So I think, and I've got cousins and relatives that are police officers, and you've already alluded to it. 95% of the police officers out there are fine, upstanding people.
That's right.
We're preachers. You and I we've been doing this a long time.
Yeah.
Nothing makes me angrier than one of our colleagues does something really stupid and really sinful, and we both know that when it happens,
It's all of us.
it's all of us.
That's right.
We're all charlatans.
Yeah.
We're all adulterers.
Right.
But on the other hand, we chose this,
Yeah.
and there is a higher level of accountability.
That's right.
When we say that God has called us to this, or when a young man or woman swears to uphold the laws of a city or a state, there is a higher level of accountability.
Yes.
And one of the things you and I don't get to do because of our prestige or privilege of being ordained ministers is mistreat the people of God.
That's right. That's right.
So there is a higher level of accountability. Let's talk about Black Lives Matter.
Sure.
First of all, I understand that Black Lives Matter. We had this conversation a couple of times. When the Black Lives Matter, if I remember right, came out of the Michael Brown
You're right.
killing. My initial reaction to all of that was like a lot of white folks, well, all lives matter. This is not a big deal. But it was when I saw the police killing of the black man in New Orleans, where they shot and killed him because he was resisting arrest, but he was unarmed.
Right.
That's when I realized Black Lives Matter. When we talk about Black Lives Matter, I just want to give this. It's not suggesting all lives don't matter,
Right.
but I think about it this way. I broke my hand a year ago, and I went to the ER. My hand was all bloody. They could tell it was broken. I was bleeding profusely. There were probably 10 people in the ER.
Right.
Guess what? They took me ahead of every one of them.
That's right.
Because I was the one more seriously injured.
Right. You know, we hear the parable with the Jesus going after leaving the 99.
Going after
and
the
going
one.
after- we don't interrupt the preacher and say, oh, wait, no, never mind the one sheep, all sheep matter. No. We recognize that the one sheep is in trouble.
Right.
The one sheep is vulnerable to wolves. The one sheep is out there. He may have fallen off of the side of a mountain or whatever. So Jesus has to give him special care. All right, now let me just clear up something. Okay. I know by visiting the Black Lives Matter website, there are some things that they stand for that we don't. Okay. Most of the people, especially Christian people, when you hear them talking about Black Lives Matter, we're talking about the principle. We're not necessarily connecting to the movement. However, we live in America. I think you shared this with me. And we don't agree with everything America does. Okay? But yet we stand and say we are proud Americans, right? So what I'm saying is that I may not agree with everything that Black Lives Matter, the movement, does, but we can stand in solidarity when it comes to this particular issue.
Well, let me just go ahead and declare myself here, but since you said the conversation that Bill and I were having, I've been ever since I 1980, I've been a Republican voter. I consider myself a good, faithful Republican, but there are some issues with Republicans that I have profound differences with. I think it has been a serious mistake that Republicans over the last 30 or 40 years, first of all, have skirted the issue of racism. I think it's a serious mistake the way that they've skirted the issue of immigration.
Yeah.
Now, I don't believe in open borders.
Right.
I do believe in a generous immigration policy. I think that Republicans have mishandled this. So, but I still don't mind telling people I vote Republican.
Right.
But let's talk about this a little bit more, because there's a lot of criticism. And I've talked, everybody that's watching us needs to know, I've had several conversations the last 2 or 3 days with a lot of black pastors. I'm just trying to hear them and see what's going on. And this is the thing, and every one of them tell me exactly what you said. I support the slogan Black Lives Matter.
Right.
But we have to acknowledge that Black Lives Matter as an organization, their manifesto, what they believe, and I want to do this because I talked to a young lady yesterday. She's a Black Lives Matter activist, young African American woman. She's a Pentecostal, and she's Church of God. Okay? So, yeah, I did. I just told you that there's a young black woman in the United States who's a member of the Church of God who is a Black Lives Matter activist. She works for the organization. And we had a very good conversation. And I brought this up to her. And one of the things I was concerned about was their embracing of the gay agenda. And she said, well, I don't embrace the gay agenda, but you shouldn't be attacked or an act of violence against because you're gay.
Right.
I'm with that.
I agree.
We don't stone people because they commit adultery.
Right.
We don't stone people because they're homosexual. They should not be denied their civil rights if they're homosexual.
Right.
I do not support homosexual marriage. Would never do that. I'm not going there. But if we shouldn't deny housing
Right.
or medical benefits or anything like that. So we want to protect their civil rights. So I'm with that. The thing that I'm concerned about, however, and I mentioned this, and we'll just talk about it, they want to dismantle cisgender privilege, which is you and me. They want to disrupt the so-called Western prescribed nuclear family structure. And as I mentioned to you earlier, the nuclear family structure has been severely disrupted in the last 50 or 60 years.
That's right.
And that's one of the primary reasons we have so much poverty.
Yeah.
And this transcends race. You want to make sure a child is raised in poverty, the easiest thing to do is be a young woman, have a baby before you're married.
That's right.
And that's not being judgmental. That's just the way it is. That's one of the main reasons that children are raised in poverty. So what would be your answer here? And again, you've already answered it some, but we've got a lot of young black Christians who are attracted to this racial justice movement, as they should be. Maybe they don't see this because we all know that younger Christians don't see the sexual morality issues the same way that you and I would. I would say they don't see them from a biblical perspective. So what would be your counsel to a young black or white, male or female, who wants to get involved in the social justice movement, who strongly believes that Black Lives Matter? How would you suggest they navigate something like this?
Yeah, I would just say, make your stance clear. Again, a movement that has such a broad base like Black Lives Matter is going to have some things that are going to disagree with your faith. Make sure that those who know you, those in whom it is important, know where you stand in terms of issues that conflict with your faith, because that's really our journey. That's going to be part of our journey most of the time. There's not much that we're going to join or be a part of that we totally agree with. I mean, I don't agree with everything in the great Church of God. I know everybody just passed out just now, but There are some good things about it that I agree with, okay? So that's where I stand, and this, the family issues and their desire, I think you just talked about to deconstruct
The nuclear family.
The nuclear family.
Yeah.
No, I can't get with that. It's just like I can't get with the rioters, but I can get with the protests. So again, we have to make our stance clear and help people to understand that we're not buying into the whole thing. We're eating the meat and throwing out the bones, as the old timers used to say. So that's kind of what I would suggest to them. Be clear that people know, so people know.
It's been suggested to me by some of my friends on the left that because I'm a white guy and cannot in any way identify with the issue, that I should not even speak about these issues, that only black people should speak about these issues. So my view on this, I think a more biblical view, is that any of us who are born into the kingdom of God, whose minds and hearts have been transformed, but more importantly, filled with the Holy Spirit, that we're allowing the Holy Spirit to shape us, that if the Holy Spirit grieves for your suffering, the same Spirit should make me grieve for your suffering.
Yeah.
So that's my position on that. But this is a question I'd like to ask you.
I agree.
The white community is rightly admonished to examine its own complicity and sinfulness. Is there room for the black community to do the same? One of the complaints I hear a lot is that you're always talking about oppression, but you're not looking at your own issues. And the other question is, do you think that we have a place to discern each other? That coming together in love, with open hearts, open minds, do we have a place to discern each other?
Yeah. I think there is a place where we can discern each other. Of course, as a black people, we do have a lot of issues that we need to confront within our community. Black on black crime. You just talked about the teenage pregnancy issue, male incarceration, which there's a level of responsibility that we carry, that we not get involved in crime, but we also know that
some of the laws are bent.
Stacked against us, exactly. Yeah.
When a white guy gets busted for cocaine and a black guy gets busted for crack,
Right, exactly.
and the white guy goes away for a year and the black goes away for 10 years,
Right.
That's a systemic issue.
That's right, yeah. So we have our issues to address. Now, if I am, as a member of the black community, if a white person wants to make suggestions or critique or add, all I suggest is that they also be willing to invest. Okay. Don't scream at me from your privileged standpoint until you're ready to, in the words of Ezekiel, to sit where I sit and be a part of the solution. So anyone who is willing to cross over the lines, if you will, or the walls, and add something and bring something and not just take something, I'm open to hear what they have to say. I'm open to critique. I'm open to suggestions. As long as we know that the heart is good, then it's better received. I had a young man who has experienced a little frustration. A young man, he's pastoring in Florida, Caucasian brother, and he was talking about reaching into the community and how he has gotten some resistance, from both black pastors as well as some of the people he's trying to help. And I said to him that that's a trust issue, So what I suggest to you, if this is on your heart, is to keep on remaining consistent find a need, meet it. When issues come up in the community, be there, be up front and center, take a stand, and as time goes by, the people in the community will start to recognize that, hey, this guy isn't here for just a moment. He's here because he's really, really concerned, and they'll start to be more accepting.
I think the reason that these discussions are so difficult is because too many of us don't take time to get to know each other.
That's right.
You and I met each other probably at a South Georgia camp meeting 15, 20 years ago. Polite, but we deliberately made the effort
That's right.
to reach out, to have these conversations.
And we still do.
We still do.
Yeah.
There are times when I need to hear a voice of a black perspective. Bill is one of the first guys I call. We sit down. Again, it's not important that we always agree, but it is important that we listen and that we come to terms. But the point I want to make here is it's very easy to stand outside the crowd and criticize. I teach a leadership class here at the seminary, and one of the things I talk about is differentiated leadership.
Right.
And differentiated leadership means that we're standing in the crowd, but above the crowd. And what I mean by that is we're standing in the crowd. That means we smell like the crowd. We hear the cussing in the crowd.
Right.
We hear the anger in the crowd. But we rise above
Yeah.
the anxiety and the hostility so that we can speak to the crowd.
Yes.
But it requires being in the crowd.
Yes, it does.
And I think that the reason, I know for a fact that most black pastors see most white church leaders as disingenuous. I know that. And because too many white leaders don't address the issues until all of a sudden we're in the middle of the conflict.
Right.
We could engender more trust
Yes.
if we walked with the crowd for a longer period of time.
Right. One of the things that I put out when everything first happened is an invitation to those who are pastoring multicultural churches as to how they should respond. I got a lot of inboxes, a lot of phone calls. Matter of fact, I think last Friday, my phone started ringing at 8 in the morning. I had several forums that day as well. But my wife will tell you I didn't stop talking until midnight. It's round the clock, guys calling for advice, and I'm glad to give it. But one of the things that I shared with them was the need to first apologize to the persons of color in their congregation if they have not addressed this issue. Okay? And if a person is a multicultural pastor, I recognize the difference between being multicultural and multicolor. Because as a multicultural pastor, you need to address the issues that all of your people are facing, and that's a tough place to be, I know.
Let me give you an example.
Sure.
Wonderful friend, pastors a great multicultural church, called me last week, said, I need to talk to you. He said, black man in my church came to me today and said, Pastor, I've realized that I'm not as important to this church as I thought I was. And my friend was really taken aback. And it was because when all of this came up, the pastor didn't address it from the pulpit.
Right.
And so I asked him, I said, let me ask you, when the COVID crisis occurred, did you give special attention to the senior adults in your church? Oh, yes, we did. We went and picked up their prescriptions. We went and picked up their groceries. We made sure that they were not alone as they were locked in. I said, so when the crisis with Aubrey happened, did you address it with the black members of your church? He said, no. And then he said, and he was as sincere as he could be, he said, how did I miss it?
Wow.
How did I not see it?
Wow.
Because he was genuinely concerned. And my response to him was, sometimes our racism is so deeply embedded, we can't see it.
Wow. That's right. Yeah. And see, and this is why it's so important for conversations like we're having to take place. because one of the things that I have admired about you is your willingness to listen and to try to see things from my perspective and from my eyes. And that only happens, when we communicate. And we would talk about Christianity. That is really what the whole incarnation was all about. It was Jesus coming down to experience what we experience, feel what we feel. Okay? Therefore, we have not a high priest who is not touched with the feelings of our infirmities. So as Christian brothers, we get together, we discuss these things. I try to see things from your eyes and your perspective. You try to see things from mine. Now, we may not always achieve it, but if we can just get a little closer,
We're trying.
then we have something. Let me just also say this. You mentioned about some of our black leaders in our community and feeling like other pastors are disingenuous. Sometimes my multicultural pastor friends experience some negativity from the other black pastors in the community. Let me just kind of help some guys to understand where that's coming from. Okay. Most of the time in our country, when there are multicultural churches, at the top is a white leader. Okay. So black people have never had a problem, and especially recently, of coming under white leadership, being pastored by white pastors. The frustration that we have as pastors is it's very rarely vice versa. Okay, I might get 2 or 3. All right, T.D. Jakes, 30,000 people. He talked about this on TBN one time. 30,000 member church, only 2% of those were white folk. So that's a frustration that we carry. So sometimes when that negative response is evoked, it comes out of that source of pain. So that's just wanted to say that.
We're almost done. I have one last question.
Sure.
I've spent, again, I've said this several, but last week or so, talked to many black pastors, many black people, just listening what's going on. And one of the things that I came away with yesterday, after talking with the Black Lives activist and another pastor who's a friend of mine, was I think it's a miracle with the history of oppression in the United States.
Right.
Slavery, Jim Crow, segregation. One of the things that was the foundation of that was what the Bible said. The Bible, the way it was presented was the Bible endorses the institution of slavery. The Bible defends segregation. This is my question I have for you, Bill. As an African American who knows this corrupt history of an evil use of Holy Scripture, how does a guy like you embrace Christianity? How does any African American embrace the Christian faith?
Well, it's really about knowing history and knowing the roots of Christianity. Okay. This idea that Christianity is a white man's religion and somehow, the slaves didn't get exposed to the gospel till they got here is there's no truth in that. You look at the path of even the apostles after Christ's ascension and where they went to minister. They went to Africa. They were in the eastern countries, and they journeyed to establish the gospel in different places. Some of the great councils that gathered to form our theology and to make statements as to where the church stood, those weren't attended by all white folk from America or white folk from anywhere. We had significant persons. I think you mentioned one earlier.
Athanasius.
The
right. Black dwarf.
Exactly, right. So he was there at the formation and the foundation.
Absolutely.
So even many of those slaves that were brought here in slave ships knew the gospel before they got here. Also, the miracle in it for those who were just exposed is their ability to hear the gospel and discern the difference between what the Bible says and what was being modeled in front of them by their slave owners. I remember the old hymn, heaven, heaven, everybody talking about ain't going to heaven. Okay. What folk didn't know was those slaves were singing about their slave master, who was claiming to be this Christian person and singing about heaven on Sunday while being an abusive slave master throughout the week, and oftentimes raping their sons and daughters and things like that. But they were able, through the power of the Holy Spirit, to discern the difference and still accept a Christ who wasn't the Christ their slave master said was, but was the Christ who laid down their lives for them and continued to walk in the faith and still do today.
I think it is a remarkable miracle that African Americans who were slaves in the 17th, 18th centuries could be so oppressed and so misused, but still embrace the faith of their masters.
That's right.
And I think the thing is that somehow the gospel transcends oppression.
Yes, it does.
The gospel transcends oppression. There's something about the message of Jesus.
How about the ability to relate the stories of the gospel to their own oppression, and that same story becomes their source of hope? Go down, Moses, and tell Pharaoh, the slave system, to let my people go. And they lived with hope and longed for the day when this oppressive system would be broken down, and that kept them alive through the experience.
Bill, I want to thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, man.
It's always a joy. I want to offer a couple of encouragements. We do have a question here, and I'm going to mention it, but I will suggest that someone ask about the fact that our general overseer has been appointed to a presidential advisory council. He has addressed that.
Yeah. Let me say I've agreed to go on very soon with him to address some issues that the black community is having with the denomination, and even this issue right here. I do want to say that he read to us, or not, I'm sorry, he didn't read to us, but partially read to us a letter that he has sent to the White House concerning some of the language, etc., and stances that are coming out of there. So while he is on the council, he is addressing and dealing with the things that we wouldn't agree with.
Pressing for accountability.
Exactly.
Very good.
King talked about the power of being in the room. You know, he went to see some presidents that he
Exactly.
totally in disagreement with. Now, I have some friends that go to the White House. I choose not to go. I'm not a fan of the president, but I choose not to go. But I don't condemn anyone else for going. So.
I want to again thank Bill, and I have a couple of last words. It has been my joy over the last couple of weeks to have these conversations with men that I've known for 10 and 15 years, black pastors in the church. And this is what I want to say to my tribe, those who have the pale face. These are remarkable men and women. They're committed to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we need your voices. And so I want to encourage my white brothers and sisters who might be suspicious of the leadership of our black brothers and sisters. I have left every one of these conversations feeling good.
Praise God.
I have left every one of these conversations, and look, I have begun it just like I began the conversation with you. I tell people I've got a big heart and a tough hide.
Yeah.
So say anything you want to say to me, you're not going to hurt my feelings. And we have had very frank conversations. I've challenged them, they've challenged me. But I want to just let everybody know, we have some wonderful, wonderful people of color who are committed to the gospel. Yes, they're going to be out there amidst the protesters. No, they're not happy, but they are committed to the gospel of Jesus Christ. I do want to point out that we're going to sponsor, PTS Thrive will sponsor this Thrive conversation. We're going to do these monthly. And the next one will be on July the 14th at 6 p.m. We've got Dr. Tim Manis, and we're going to discuss the crisis in pastoral care. There is a crisis right now of pastoral suicides and pastoral failures. And so we're going to discuss the role of pastoral care, pastoral self-care. Guys, ladies, thank you for joining us. God bless you. Let's come together, let's pray together, and let's commit to ourselves that the gospel of Jesus Christ is the remedy for every conflict that ails us.
Yes, it
God
is.
bless you.
Bless you.